Shana Tova. Today is September 7th, 2021. This morning, I'm wondering if you can recall where you were on September 11th, 2001. What were you doing when you got the call or heard the sound or felt the actual fall of the towers? Take a moment now to recall what that morning was like for you when our world was dislodged. Maybe you were in your apartment. Maybe you were near the towers. Maybe you were even in the towers. Probably everyone in this room has a story. So many of us were so close to that horrible day. This morning, as we approach the 20th anniversary of that dreadful attack on our city and our country, we take time to reflect and remember. Memory must be cultivated and cared for to continue. I worry that only 2 decades later, if we don't meaningfully memorialize, that the memory of September 11th will fade and reduce. So where were you on that morning? What did it feel like? What did it sound like? On September 11th, 2001, I was in a college dorm room in Wisconsin. I woke up to a dozen messages on my phone, and I knew something was wrong. Like many of us, I had family who was supposed to be at the towers that day. Like many of us, New York was a home for me. That morning, I stared at the television in complete shock, watching the unimaginable unfold. And something I'll never forget is that right at that moment, as the world came apart, a girl that lived down the hall came by my room. She grew up in the Midwest. In her ponytail and shorts, she looked at me, sitting on that floor, staring at that screen, and she said, "Oh yeah, I heard about that." And then she left, and she went for a run. In the middle of a terror attack, she went for a run. Year after year, that image comes back to me, and it troubles me always. I don't share that story to shame her. She was a good and decent person. I share it to remind you that we are a unique congregation. Out of all of the congregations in the country, the people in our community, the people in this room were among the closest to the attacks. You have a unique window into the tragedies of the day, and therefore you have a unique responsibility to help others to truly and properly memorialize 9/11. You can tell the stories of that fateful day. Very few others can. I wasn't there that morning. I should say I wasn't here that morning. But many of you were. So as I contemplated how to frame my message this morning, I spoke with some of you, some of the longest standing members of our congregation who were near or in the attack. Thank you to those of you who were willing to share their memories with me. Thank you for opening up to me, even though it may have been difficult, because in your voice I heard urgency, even maybe some panic, some 2 decades later. You had so much to say, it was if you couldn't get the stories out fast enough. You wanted me to understand, and I hope I really heard you. You told me stories of fear and concern and anxiety and even terror, of not knowing what would come next. You ran to a payphone to check on your loved ones. You rushed to your children's school, praying for their safety. You banded together with strangers. You prayed for the acquaintances you encountered, the shopkeeper who once sold you a shirt from a store in the towers, the custodian you always saw cleaning the floors. You told me your stories of being trapped in what became an inferno of an office building. How inside you found a Jewish stranger and together you recited the Shema. How you ran down 83 flights of stairs. How you thought your life was over. How you saved the life of another. How you lived. Everyone I spoke to had so many memories of that sensory, consuming experience, about the indescribable smell, the thickness of smoke in the air, the horrific visuals you saw and that you still cannot unsee, about the sound of helicopters hovering overhead, the feeling of earth underneath you shaking as the towers fell, the images of military personnel lining canal streets, about police blockades and checkpoints, about the shock of seeing yourself in some sort of movie you never hoped to be in. I heard about it all, the uncertainty, the fear, the unthinkable heroics. Your memories are so very potent, but the collective memory of September 11th is at risk because memorializing is not as easy as it seems. This may be why Torah is always commanding us to remember, because Torah knows that the human tendency is to forget. I mean, consider the state of our nationally marked days. On Veterans Day, how many of us really honor veterans? Or are we more likely to enjoy a day off or to shop? Yesterday was Labor Day. How many of us took the meaning of that holiday with any seriousness? I did not. Even on Memorial Day, do we actually memorialize? Unless we think it's only a secular problem, the Jewish calendar can't escape this process of collective diminishing either. Tisha B'Av is the saddest day of the year. We're supposed to be mourning the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple, and the expulsion from Spain. But do we even mark it at all? If we, of all people, don't memorialize and do so with the greatest of intention, September 11th could become something quite different. Are we willing to let that happen? To let it be a day with great sales and great shopping, but not a day with the great honor and sadness that it merits? This change happens more quickly than we'd like to admit, but I believe that we in this room have the power to slow the trajectory because personalization is our greatest tool against commercialization. So tell the stories. Tell them to your children, in your home, and on your way, when you lie down and when you rise up. Let's be honest. It's not just the looming threat of commercialization that hovers over this anniversary. It's politics. In preparing for today, I also spoke with people beyond our congregation, mostly people in my generation or younger, people that were in their 20s or teens in 2001. Can you guess what they said? I bet you can. On the whole, that younger group didn't speak about the day, nor about the people who were lost about the day. But instead, they focused on the aftermath of the day. They didn't talk about memory. They talked about politics and policy, both then and now. I say this with no judgment. There are reasons for that. They expressed their concerns about hyper-patriotism and about what they saw as American arrogance, about the emotional and human stain of the Iraq War, about militarism and racism and imperialism, about the myth of American exceptionalism. They spoke about Afghanistan. They spoke a lot about Afghanistan, about developing distrust in the American government and feeling distanced from the image of the American flag. As I said, there is a time and a place for all of those very real concerns and reactions. They cannot be dismissed or denied. They are the reality of a generation. But my question this morning is, can we imagine what if it would be like, for a moment, we paused the politicizing? If just for a day, we all mourned and remembered instead of judged and analyzed. And I know it can be so hard because we live at this time of tremendous politicalization, where bond-breaking fights erupt between friends and families, where cancellations and extremes are routine, where disagreements between the left and the far left can sometimes feel as intense as disagreements between the left and the right, where it feels like everything is politicized, categorized, analyzed, and scrutinized, where every single moment is political. And there are real reasons for that also. But at this moment, when we approach the anniversary of an attack on our city, can we resist the desire to politicize and intellectualize and allow ourselves to be vulnerable and just feel those feelings, to remember the sounds and sights and smells of that time, to help give 9/11 and those some 2,996 souls space and honor. Those of us who were closest to the attacks of that devastating day have the opportunity to give a face to the victims, to tell the stories about our city. On the anniversary of this day, we must turn our thoughts to the actual people who walked out of that building and said, "But for the grace of God go I." And we must mourn and remember all of those who were not so fortunate. We cannot afford to delegate the telling of our history. Relativity generates reality. Proximity produces perspective. Closeness creates clarity. So even if you weren't there, even if you were close, all the way up in Chelsea or all the way up on the Upper West Side or anywhere in New York, you were closer than most others in this world. Tell your stories. For the child that watched the towers fall from her second grade classroom, we remember. For the person who battles health problems to this day because of that day, we remember. For the partner who lost her other half that morning, we remember. For the loss of a father who will never hug his daughter again, we remember. For the death of a firefighter who valiantly saved others and was not saved himself, we remember. For all those whom we've lost, we say, Zichronam livracha. May their memories be for a blessing. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I ask that you please rise as we recite a special Kaddish for those whom we've lost. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbi, B'alma divrach yiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, b'chayachon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam U'almei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shmei D'Kudisha B'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba min Shemaya. V'chayim aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say, amen.